Very, very happy Dhanteras to all of you all over the world. Today is such a beautiful holiday here in India and for Indians all over the world. It's the day of Dhanteras where we celebrate the true wealth. And of course, the true wealth is not in gold or cash. The true wealth is in our spiritual connections. And it's also the day where we celebrate Dhanvantariji, who's the father of Ayurveda. And so we celebrate health and balance and alignment. And in just a couple of moments, I'm going to be joined by a dear friend of mine, Reverend Mark Grayson, who is a reverend from Connecticut in the United States. And he runs a beautiful, beautiful center community congregation that I've had the honor and privilege and pleasure of speaking to and being in conversation with Mark there. And he has just written a new book around men and their connection to spirituality and their connection to the divine feminine in themselves. So I'm going to bring Mark and we can hear from him all about the beautiful work and research that he's been doing on this important topic. Mark, how are you?
I'm great. It's so good to see you.
So wonderful to see you, and so beautiful that two over 50s managed to make technology work.
Well, thanks to you. I still struggle with it. I think you've got a
But
good
we did it. We did
ability
it. We
there.
got it. We got it to work. I could not remember the last time I had started an Instagram live. It's been years, but like riding a bicycle, and I'm so glad that you managed to get on. I'm so happy, and congratulations for your new book.
Thank you.
I was just sharing just before bringing you on that you've been really diving into the role of men. And it's so interesting because just barely 2 weeks ago, we were celebrating Navratri, which is this gorgeous celebration in the Hindu tradition of the mother goddess. And we spend 9 days celebrating all of the different forms of the goddess. And one of the things that we talked about was the fact that embracing and embodying the goddess is not something that requires you to be in the body of a female, but that actually that presence of the divine feminine is something that needs to be tapped into and celebrated and honored, regardless of whether we are in the body of a woman or the body of a man. And I know that this is something that you've been doing a lot of writing and speaking and thinking and teaching about. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on why it seems so difficult for men to honor and celebrate. I mean, it's difficult for women anyway, but it's obviously much, much more difficult for men to honor that and celebrate that inside themselves, and what you have found works to help them really tap into that beautiful aspect of their own beings.
Yeah. It's a great place to begin. And thank you so much for doing this. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I think it all starts pretty early from guys. I mean, from a very early age, we are conditioned as men, at least here in the United States, but I suspect it's probably around the world, um, to devalue and even dismiss the qualities of the characteristics that we associate with being feminine. And it goes against our nature to do so because, all human beings have both sides to their beings. But for men, it becomes a real thing very early on to prove that you're not girly. Um, and that just gets started, and it just gets worse and worse, I think, as we mature as young men, and and go off on our path through life. And there's a lot of people writing about this now. Of course, our good friend, mutual friend, Mirabai Starr has written a whole book on the sacred feminine and the ways in which we can reclaim it, which I talk about a lot in my book, because I love her work, and I think she gives us a lot of good insight into the many different dimensions of the feminine sides of our being that we need to incorporate, citing the goddesses across many faith traditions, that we can use as models to think about the different pieces that are missing. But there's also another wonderful researcher here in New York City by the name of Niobe Way, who's been studying boys and girls for 40 years. She's a professor of psychology at NYU, and she too has come to this conclusion that we live in a society that just puts so much emphasis on the attributes that we associate with masculinity or with men, and really devalues the feminine side of our nature, and that gets men and women in trouble. My sister, for example, is a high-ranking oil and gas executive in Houston, and she's had a very successful career. But I was talking to her yesterday about the ways in which she is having to reclaim her own femininity now that she has actually stepped back from being in the business world. And she would, if she were on the line with us today, would say that she was crippled by the fact that she had to perform in, at least in the business world, along the lines, exhibit the behaviors that would make her competitive with the other men at work. So I just feel like, and this is kind of a very big abstract conversation, I just feel like it's time to blow the whistle on this for men. My focus has been on men, but for women as well, and acknowledge that there are these capacities that are not only innate in us, but they are essential to our own well-being, and frankly, the researchers are saying now they're essential to success, even in the workplace. And that, what are they? Well, they're things that are like really authentically being able to form connections with other people. And we've devoted how many years? 20 years, tons of investment in building emotional intelligence. But that kind of stuff is only half the story, right? Because there's this other piece that's missing, which is relational intelligence, and really listening with curiosity, really trying to understand and acknowledge the other person's point of view. You might not agree with it, but at least you recognize it, you can articulate it, you can see the merit in it, even if you don't agree with it, right? There's stuff like that is, women, because they are so much more relationally brought up, I believe, men are taught to detach, be strong, silent, independent, right? But women don't get that conditioning as much as men, and so they have better capacities to do this work. And so that's one area, that I think is, and that gets all then expressed into like networking. Men see networking as transactional, right? We're making a deal, we're going to have a relationship, and if there's,
Yes.
and something's going to come out of it. Whereas I think women see networking as kind of a system that they flow through, and see the way in which networks, the outcome might not be a deal. It might be just lifting everybody up and making connections where none existed. And I think that that's another example of feminine wisdom that we could all benefit from, and just the 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 ability to be a caretaker and a nurturer, right? So often that capacity gets relegated to the wife in a household, that it's her responsibility to take care of people. Well, it isn't. We're all capable of it. And frankly, according to Susan Faludi, a New York Times reporter, it was customary for men to be much, much, much more involved in caretaking and nurturing up through World War II. But then something happened in the 50s. We can talk about that endlessly, where there was a huge shift in roles and responsibilities, and we lost that as men. We lost that sort of sense that we had an obligation to the community, to others, and especially to our families, to be present. And thankfully, today's generation of dads are picking up the ball and running with it. They're doing a much better job than my generation did. Anyway, we could go on, but those are just a handful of examples. There's more in the book of things that I think are essential to our well-being, that make us more successful as frankly, as employees, workers, leaders, and it expands our humanity. We finally live into our full humanity. It makes us whole as people instead of caricatures, stick figures. Right.
Beautiful, beautiful. And it's such a critical piece. I was speaking recently here when the topic came up that in the Sanatan Dharma tradition, we actually have a concept of the divine as what we call Ardh Nadi Ishwar. Ardh Nadi Ishwar. And it's literally, I don't like to say half masculine and half feminine because that implies a separation. And it's not. It's a blending, but a blending that is Nadi. Nadi is the divine Shakti, the feminine energy, and Ishwar is the masculine energy, the Shakti and Shiv, the Prakriti and Purush. But the Ardhnarishwar is a depiction of the divine with the masculine and the feminine aspects interwoven so beautifully together. And there are just gorgeous, exquisite, artistic depictions of this that really remind us that when we actually each embrace not only the fullness of the gender that we happen to be, but actually that we embrace the fullness of all of the genders, that we become
Right.
gender full, how much deeper and richer our lives are. So thank you for bringing that topic up. I think it's so important. And you also had spoken about something that really interested me, and I thought it would be really interesting for the community, is this idea that men, I think it's actually true for all of us who want to succeed, but entering it through the stream of masculinity and men, how we're taught to be much more rational, pragmatic, empirical, rather than spiritual. And what a detriment that is to our lives. So maybe if you could talk a little bit about that, about what the
Yeah.
background of that looks like, what it looks like when it manifests in society, and of course, what are our ways out?
Yeah. Well, I think for me, in the way in which I perceive this, is that it gets started, at least here in the West, and it might not be the same for everyone in India and other parts of the world. But we here in the West live in a very secular society for the most part. Now, it's a little bit more complicated than that because according to Pew Research Center, 80-90% of us believe in a higher power and pray daily to something, even if we're not observing a particular religious practice. But by and large, our culture, our society places an extraordinary emphasis on rationality. And we have done so since the Enlightenment. It's ironic in a way, because if you look back to what the founding fathers were saying when they were creating our form of government, democracy, they were actually thinking that democracy was going to be a discernment process, if you right, of the transcendent. I think they use providence as the word, but the divine will, would be somehow captured in our voting. So it wasn't always like this sense that the only thing that matters is what the data says and whether or not you can prove it scientifically. And we all know, and I think there's a lot of physicists probably in the group who would now agree that just because we can't prove it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? It just probably means that we don't have the tools to measure it. So anyway, I think that's really where, for me, the conversation gets started. But what happens for men is that, in addition to being taught that we need to be strong, silent, independent, emotionally detached, all that stuff that goes into man box culture, we are also taught to be extremely rational and conditioned and rewarded for being so. I think it's safe to say that our schools, encourage that as well as we're going through school. That's what gets rewarded, our abilities to analyze and process and all that. And somewhere along the line, we're also picking up the message that all these spiritual things are a bit of hocus pocus. Well, we know, of course, that's not the case, that there is a divine being within all of us that is connected to the one that unites us, right? Whatever faith tradition, and basically that's the concept. And but we don't do enough to develop our capacities for I would just say experiencing. It's so hard to find the right word, right? And you have many good words, so help me out here. But it's to me, it's because we can never understand it. It's limitless, right? So we can't, but we can experience it.
Yeah, to touch it.
To touch it, to feel it. I mean, we feel it deep down inside of ourselves, and sometimes we perceive it, if we're lucky. And I think that we need to reclaim, along with a lot of other things that are conditioned out of us. We need to reclaim those innate capacities as well. Give ourselves permission to open ourselves up to the possibility that these dimensions of our being exist and need to be nurtured as much as any. It's like going to a gym, right? We need to go to a spiritual gym.
Yes,
and develop these capacities, bring them online, and use them to connect to each other in the way that we are constructed to do so. We're social animals. I mean, that's the way we were designed. And we are meant to have these experiences of the transcendent and connection to each other and the one. And so I break it up late in the book because I know that if I were to talk about the journey that I'm taking men on in the book as a spiritual journey, that would be instantly dismissed by a lot of people. But hopefully when they get to chapter 6 or whatever it is, it's, I've got them along going on enough of an adventure that they want to be exposed to some of these ideas about how to, open up and empty out and acknowledge that at the end of the day, right, we're not in control. You know, that everything comes, we're just a portal, letting things come through, well up, and become manifest in the world. I
Yes.
mean, it's that. And
Beautiful.
that's it.
And that's the emphasis. It's the emphasis, of course, on surrender and opening. Um, I was thinking as you're talking about using your new book really as a way, even though it's a hidden kind of surreptitious way of anchoring men, all readers, but particularly men, back in spirit, which of course is so critical, whether we're looking at world peace or we're looking at environmental protection or we're looking at any kind of sustainability or we're looking at just dealing with individual rates of depression, anxiety, addiction, suicide, loneliness. We know that spirituality is the key. So, in our last couple of minutes, why don't you talk about the book specifically? I know we've spoken about different aspects of it already, but why don't you give us a couple of minutes about the book itself and really what you are bringing into the world through this new book?
Right. So, I think it's maybe more useful to think about it as a journey of healing for men. But frankly, I think it's also a journey of healing for women. My wife keeps telling me, you got to keep acknowledging that what you're saying is really relevant to women as well. And the way in which I constructed the book was to go deeper and deeper into the male psyche. So we start, with the body and the way in which men are disconnected from their bodies. I mean, on the one hand, we take great delight in them and we spend a lot of time, working out and, trying to power up to show our strength because that's the one thing that we value more than anything else in life. But at the same time, we experience a great deal of shame. It's the common characteristic amongst men is the shame that we feel about our physical presence, and then that gets interpenetrated with everything else that we do in life. The shame about work, shame about we can make a long list. So I talk about how to acknowledge that shame and how to begin to work to a better understanding of it. Second chapter we talked a lot about, which is how do we reclaim the feminine side of our personalities and make that more present in our lives. And there's a lot of different examples drawn from my conversations with Mirabai and my own personal life and other men about how they've been successful in doing so. The third chapter, or the fourth chapter, I think is in the book after the introduction, is about emotions and how we can get better touch in what they really are and ways in which we can work with them, how we can develop our relational capacities. And then I personally believe that we are missing out on the experience of touch. Now, I want to be clear, it's non-sexual, consensual touch, which we all know is a source of healing for everyone. But because we live in a touch-averse world, at least here in the United States, it has become clear to me that we need to reclaim and rediscover the language of touch and reintegrate that into our lives. And the next chapter is a really interesting thing. It takes on the way in which men are kind of taught about their sexuality. And it's a sensitive topic. I don't want to go too deeply into it. It's in the book because in the public sphere, it's tough to talk about. But by and large, men are, taught by this culture of masculinity that sex is almost an act of aggression. And it's not, of course. It's a way of relating to somebody in a beautiful way. And we're taught all kinds of nonsense about our own identities as men as well, that I take apart, blow by blow with the latest research so that there's a better understanding of who we really are as men. Then there's a chapter on spirituality and the way in which we need to reclaim that aspect of our being and integrate it in. Then there's a couple of myths that I take on that are central to the culture of masculinity, and frankly, I think it's central to our world at this point. And that's, well, the first myth is um, that you are what you produce. You know, we are crazy, like workaholics these days. And the World Health Organization has said these 55-hour work weeks are killing us, literally, increasing in heart disease and other kinds of complications. I mean, we have to realize that we are human beings who are put on the planet to be, not just do. And there's just a whole lot of stuff in that one that I know you've written about in your book, From Home to Yourself, and I have to talk to you about it when I get to Rishikesh, because I'm working on a lot of the stuff that you wrote about, and I can't wait to talk about it with you. And then the other myth that I think is really important to acknowledge and unravel is that how do we define success? Is success really defined by how big your bank account is, your house is, your car is, all that kind of stuff? And I don't know how it is in India, but here it's out of control. I
Yes,
mean,
here too.
I think, and there's a wonderful book, which I can't say, I'm not a very good um, speaker of French, but Raphael Liogier, the French philosopher, has written a book called Chaos. It's 1,000 pages in French. But basically, he claims that we have, as a culture, worldwide culture, begun to worship in an idolatrous way something he calls quantification. Um, we worship the vastness of things because we can't deal with the transcendent. We've replaced it with, vast amounts of wealth, vast amounts of power, vast amounts of status, vast amounts of fans, likes. I mean, you name it. We put vast in the sort of ultimate dream category, and it's that too is killing us. We need to have a much more balanced sense of what success looks like, and I think that balance changes over time, as you go through stages in life. I mean, you have it in the Hindu transition of the student, householder, forest dweller, elder, chapters of life. They're different, right? And the balance is different in each stage of life. And I think that the D School at Stanford does a beautiful job of spelling that out and giving us in the West tools to help figure out what our priorities are, should be, what's a good balance for us. So I talk about that in the book as well. And then the end is just, I personally believe, I'm the eternal optimist, but I think there's a lot of evidence that we're going to be able to reinvent this culture of masculinity. So it is so much healthier for all of us. Um, and it's been going on for 60 years, and I believe it's going to be like the Berlin Wall. Nobody saw it coming, but it came down, and it seemed like it happened overnight. So I'm gunning for that.
I love it. I love it. Well, it's so beautiful that I know you've been working on this book for a while. I've been hearing about it, and I'm so, so glad that it's finally out in the world, because I agree fully with your wife that this is not only something that men need, but that it's something that actually our society needs, because so many of the cultural norms, the policies, whether it's actual legal policies, actual governmental policies, or just the societal and social norms with which we live, are actually created and upheld by the men, and or by women, with the false belief that in order to be successful I have to be more masculine,
Right.
and I have to, prove that I'm just as good at being a man as a man is, and only then can I be successful. And so we end up with these civilizational and societal norms that are detrimental for men, for women, for society in general, for the very fabric, the tapestry of our communities, of our civilizations, of our nations of Mother Earth. So
Yes,
I
it's
know.
wreaking havoc on the planet itself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm so happy that you've done this. Do you happen to have a copy of the book with you that you could kind of hold up
Oh,
and
wait,
share and
give me
show
one.
everybody what it looks like? Yeah.
Da-da-da.
Yeah,
Can you
because
see
then
that?
everybody can, yeah, there you go. There you go. Um, and just in closing, it's interesting because the title, of course, on here comes backwards. The title is Getting Naked, and of course, you don't mean it in a sexual way, but in a
No.
spiritual way. And
Yeah.
it reminds me of one of the things that I speak about so frequently with regard to the practice of meditation and equating it to if you come home at the end of the day from work and you run a warm bath because you're stressed and you're tired and you want to take a hot bath. In order for that hot bath to actually be able to de-stress you, to relax you, the non-negotiable requirement is that you take off your clothes. And that if you actually try to get into that warm bath with your suit and tie and jacket and shoes, you will render the power of the bath useless in bringing you any level of relaxation.
Yes.
And on a spiritual level, it's the same thing. It's like when we sit down to meditate or to pray, if we carry all of our false self, the stories, the narratives, the neuroses, the fears, the desires, the egos, the attachments, if we bring all of that in, then it's so much harder to drop into the spaciousness, the presence that
Yes.
meditation offers us. And so it's the
Yes.
spiritual equivalent of getting in a bath with our top hat and tie and shoes and jackets on. So it's
I couldn't agree more. I think, in fact, that metaphor is so beautiful because it's like that's exactly what we need to do, in order to really understand the self, the true self, is to take off all the armor and reveal it, right? And because we don't need it. I mean, there are times, of course, that you have to protect yourself, defend yourself. I mean, that's life. But on the whole, we don't need it, and we're better off without it. So
absolutely. Well, thank you so much for writing this book. I hope that it does beautifully. I assume that everybody can get it online on Amazon or wherever they
yes,
shop online for books.
I
Fantastic.
checked to make sure it's available over in India as well. So that
Oh,
shouldn't be a
great.
problem. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And thank you so much for joining us this evening. And I
Thank
look so
you.
forward to having you with us soon in Rishikesh.
Couple weeks. Can't wait to see
Yes,
you.
yes, wonderful.
Okay.
So, so much love, Mark.
Thank you, Sadhviji.